At 3:07 p.m., my father slid a folder across the table and said, "We just need your signature." Inside was a plan to take everything Grandma left me, her house, her investments, even her wedding ring, and put it under their control. They thought I'd say yes. What they didn't know was that every asset was already in an ironclad trust with my name on it. If you've ever had to stand up to your own family to protect what's right, this story is for you. The text came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Emily Carter was wrapping up a virtual client consultation when her phone buzzed with the familiar ringtone she'd assigned to her mother, a soft piano chime that always managed to sound vaguely accusatory. She glanced at the screen. Family meeting this Saturday. 4 p.m. Important. Please don't be late. No greeting. No context. No explanation. Just like always. Emily exhaled slowly and stared out the window of her high-rise Chicago office. The glass was dotted with raindrops, each one trickling down in slow motion, as if time had decided to match the weight in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd received a message like that. And every time, it meant only one thing. Tyler, her younger brother, the family wildcard, the serial entrepreneur with a trail of bankruptcies, broken relationships, and impulsive decisions, was in trouble again. And once again, the unspoken assumption was clear: Emily would fix it. Later that evening, Emily poured herself a glass of Cabernet and sank into her sofa, still in her navy blazer and heels. She didn't bother turning on the lights. The muted city glow was enough. She picked up her phone and reread the text. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, just not showing up, letting someone else deal with the family chaos for once. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't who she had ever been allowed to be. Emily Carter was 36 years old, with a sharp mind, a sharper wit, and a financial advisory firm she'd built from scratch after finishing her MBA at Northwestern. Her office was sleek, her life efficient, her wardrobe minimal and elegant. To the outside world, she was every bit the portrait of success. But inside the Carter family, she was still the dependable older sister, the one who could handle things, the one who didn't need as much. Her accomplishments were acknowledged with polite nods, while Tyler's mediocre efforts were celebrated like Olympic victories. She had long ago given up on receiving validation from her parents. What she hadn't learned, at least not yet, was how to stop seeking peace by sacrificing herself. Saturday arrived faster than expected. She parked in front of the familiar colonial-style house in Evanston, the home she grew up in, where every creaking floorboard seemed to remember old tensions. She sat in the car for a minute, gathering her thoughts, her breath fogging up the windshield. Just get through it, she told herself. Smile. Listen. Say as little as possible. She rang the doorbell even though she still had a key. Some boundaries, however small, felt necessary now. Her mother, Margaret Carter, opened the door with her usual perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore pearls and a lavender cardigan like always. Emily. Good. You're here. Her father, Walter, stood as she entered the living room, adjusting his reading glasses and gesturing toward the armchair across from him. Tyler was already slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging her. Water tea, Margaret offered. I'm fine, thanks, Emily replied, her voice calm, professional. She took a seat and crossed her legs. For a moment, there was only the hum of the old wall clock and the faint sound of traffic outside. Her father cleared his throat. "Well," he began. "We wanted to talk about something delicate." Emily braced herself. "Here it comes. You know how important family unity is to us." Margaret chimed in, sitting beside Tyler and folding her hands in her lap. "Through everything, we've always tried to support each other. Some of us more than others." Emily muttered under her breath. Her father ignored the jab. "Tyler's had a bit of a setback." "Again," Emily said flatly. Walter's jaw tightened. "He's made some mistakes. But we don't believe in giving up on family." Emily turned to Tyler. He was still staring at his phone, his shoulders hunched in that familiar defensive posture. "What happened this time?" she asked. Margaret spoke up before Tyler could answer. "Some gambling issues have resurfaced. Nothing like before. Just..." He got in a little over his head. Emily leaned back and exhaled sharply through her nose. "How much is a little?" Her parents exchanged glances. "About 300,000. Walter said finally. Emily blinked. 300 what? There's interest. And some tax issues." Margaret added quickly. "But that's not the point. The point is we have a solution." Emily said nothing. She just looked at them. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice softening to a rehearsed kind of gentleness. "Your grandmother left you a substantial estate, Emily. You know that. And she would have wanted that money to help the family." Emily's stomach dropped. She could already feel the heat rising behind her eyes. "You want me to use Grandma Eleanor's inheritance to pay Tyler's gambling debts?" "It's not just for Tyler," her father said. "It's about preserving the family's financial integrity. It's about saving your brother's life," Margaret added. Tyler finally looked up, his expression tired, guarded. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Emily said, her voice cold now. "Steady. But you're fine letting them ask for you." A silence stretched between them. "Emily," her father said, adjusting his glasses, "we're not saying you have to give it all. Just enough to stabilize the situation." Eleanor would have understood. Emily stood slowly, smoothing the front of her coat. Eleanor understood more than you think. And without another word, she walked out of the room, their voices echoing behind her as she closed the front door. The drive back to downtown Chicago was a blur of taillights and thoughts Emily couldn't quiet. The rain had stopped, but the city was still cloaked in a gray dampness, as though even the weather knew she'd just crossed some invisible line, one she wouldn't be able to uncross. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel as her parents' words played on a loop in her mind. Eleanor would have wanted that money to help the family. The arrogance of it. The audacity. They had no idea what Eleanor had wanted. Emily did. That night, unable to sleep, she poured herself a glass of bourbon and stepped into the small study in her condo, a space she had curated with intention. On one shelf sat a single photo in a silver frame, Eleanor, sharp-eyed and smiling, arm draped around 16-year-old Emily in front of an office building in Vermont. Jefferson and Morrow, estate planning and investment law. It wasn't the kind of photo other girls her age displayed. While their bedrooms were filled with souvenirs from Disney trips or prom snapshots, Emily's most treasured memory was of a day most teens would have dreaded. That day, Eleanor had handed her a leather folder with her name embossed in gold and said simply, "You're ready." It had started years before. When Emily was just 12. Eleanor began inviting her over on quiet weekends. While Tyler got baseball games and Six Flags trips with their parents, Emily got long afternoons in her grandmother's sunlit kitchen poring over old ledgers, stock tickers, and clippings from the Wall Street Journal. Most people saw Eleanor as a genteel widow with a collection of pearls and an old family home in Vermont. What they missed was her mind. She had run her late husband's manufacturing business for 2 decades after his death, and quietly multiplied the family's modest wealth into something far more substantial. She taught Emily things no one else in the family thought she needed to know. How to read a profit and loss statement. How to evaluate long-term investments. Why self-sufficiency wasn't a personality trait, it was a form of armor. At 16, Emily opened her first investment account with $1.200. She had earned tutoring, algebra, and babysitting over 2 summers. Eleanor matched it, but made her do the paperwork herself. At 18, when Emily got into Northwestern, Eleanor was the only one who didn't suggest she apply for student loans to learn financial responsibility. She paid the full tuition up front. Debt is sometimes necessary, Eleanor had said, sipping her tea. But it should never be your default. And help, Emily had asked. Only when it's asked for, Eleanor replied. And only if it teaches you how not to need it again. Sometime after that, the seed was planted. Emily remembered the first time Eleanor hinted at her will. They were walking the perimeter of the Vermont property one fall. The trees ablaze in red and gold. Eleanor paused near the edge of the woods and said, "This land's been in our family for 4 generations. I want it to stay with someone who respects what it means." At the time, Emily had thought it was just sentimental rambling. But over the years, Eleanor grew more direct. "Your parents mean well, Emily. But they make decisions based on appearances." And Tyler, she shook her head. "He's never had to struggle. That kind of person doesn't understand legacy, only leverage." When Eleanor fell ill, Emily was 32 and at the height of growing her advisory firm. She made the only decision that felt right. She moved her grandmother into her own guest room and coordinated every part of her care. Her parents visited occasionally. Tyler showed up exactly twice, both times to ask for money. The day before Eleanor passed, they sat together in the library, the same room where she had taught Emily to balance a checkbook when she was just 13. "I've made changes to the will," Eleanor said, her voice thin but certain. "The lawyers know. Calvin's handling everything." Emily had tried to protest, but Eleanor held up a trembling hand. "You're not getting more because I love you more. You're getting it because you'll protect it. You'll use it. They'll be angry." Emily had whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said. "But if you waver, they'll take everything I've built and burn it to the ground. And you know they will." 3 weeks later, Emily sat in Calvin Spencer's office as he read aloud the terms of Eleanor's will. Tyler received a conditional trust accessible only for education or launching a legitimate business with approval from the trustee. Her parents were given a few specific gifts: a painting, a classic car, and the summer home's antique furniture. But the bulk of the estate, including the Vermont property, the entire investment portfolio, and all remaining liquid assets went to Emily. Eleanor amended this will 3 times in her final year, Calvin said. "Each time with the same intent to place full stewardship in your hands." Emily remembered looking up and seeing her mother's expression. Equal parts confusion and disbelief. Her father had gone quiet. lips tight. Tyler didn't say anything at all. But his eyes had narrowed. That had been 18 months ago. Since then, her parents had kept things mostly polite, occasionally passive-aggressive. Tyler had resurfaced only in vague conversations or strained birthday calls. Until now. Until that Saturday. Until the text that brought her back to that living room, where everything familiar also felt foreign. And now, they wanted to dismantle it all. Sell the Vermont house. Liquidate the portfolio. Cash in the heirlooms that had passed down through the women in their family since the 1800s. All to bail Tyler out of another disaster he created with the same mix of charm, recklessness, and denial. He'd always carried like a second skin. Emily stood in front of the bookshelf now, still holding the photo of her and Eleanor. She thought about legacy. Not as money, not as land, but as clarity, as courage. As the moment you decide that being the good daughter no longer means being the sacrificial one. She placed the photo back on the shelf. She had protected Eleanor in her final years. Now, she would protect everything Eleanor had entrusted to her, no matter the cost. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that feels rehearsed, like the world had paused, waiting to see what Emily would do next. She sat on her balcony, wrapped in a wool cardigan, nursing a second cup of coffee gone cold. The Chicago skyline loomed in the distance, muted by haze. As she stared at nothing and everything at once. It always started the same way. A phone call. A meeting. A crisis. Tyler had fallen again. And the family needed saving. Again. The first time had been after his sports bar in Lincoln Park collapsed 6 months into its grand opening. Tyler had talked for hours at family dinners about how nobody was doing high-end nachos the right way, and how craft cocktails with local sports tie-ins would redefine bar culture. Emily had her doubts, starting with the fact that Tyler had no experience in hospitality, and ending with the absurd budget he insisted he could stretch with charm alone. She had tried to offer advice quietly, respectfully. He'd rolled his eyes. You just don't get vision. When it failed spectacularly, her parents had pulled Emily aside during a holiday brunch. Tyler was devastated. Her mother had said, "We're going to help him regroup." Her father had added. What they meant, of course, was, "We need you to co-sign the loan so we can pay off the remaining debt." She had hesitated. They had guilted. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," her mother said with a tilt of the head. "Surely this isn't a hardship for you." Then came the app venture. Tyler had linked up with a college friend and promised to launch the next Uber. But for high-end dog grooming. Emily had actually laughed out loud when she first heard it, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. The app never made it past mock-ups. They had burned through 50 grand before the idea collapsed, under its own nonsense. Her parents framed it as a learning experience. For Tyler. For Emily. It was another meeting. Another plea. Another round of silent nodding as she watched her inheritance inch closer to non-existence. Then came the car rental business. Luxury vehicles. VIP clientele. No real licensing. He leased vehicles on borrowed credit. Mismanaged insurance. And ran into legal trouble when one client disappeared with a Range Rover. That time, her parents didn't even ask. They simply told her, "You'll understand. It's family." Emily rested her forehead on the railing now, her thoughts churning. It's family. That line had been used to stitch together every bad decision, every manipulation. Every time they'd asked her to ignore her instincts in favor of keeping the peace. And every time, she had been the good daughter, the steady one, the safe harbor. She'd walked into every carefully orchestrated conversation, every pseudo-intervention, with her lips pressed into a tight smile and a notebook in her purse. Because she thought strength meant endurance. Because she believed silence equaled maturity. Because she wanted them to love her the way they loved Tyler, loudly, without restraint. It hadn't always been so obvious. Growing up, she had excelled straight A's, awards, college scholarships. But the more she achieved, the quieter the praise became. Her wins were expected. Routine. Tyler brought home C's and they ordered pizza to celebrate. He broke a bone during a skateboarding stunt and their mother cried for days. Emily had mono for 2 weeks and was told to drink tea and not be dramatic. They didn't say it outright, but they showed it. Over and over. You don't need as much as he does. You're fine. He's trying his best. Now she was 36. And she could still hear their voices every time she tried to draw a boundary. Still felt the weight of that old script clinging to her spine. But lately, something inside her had started to shift. Maybe it had started with Eleanor's final words. Maybe it had started long before. In some forgotten moment of exhaustion. But now she could feel it clearly. I used to think I was strong because I stayed quiet. She whispered to no one. But maybe real strength is knowing when to say no. She stood and stepped back inside her apartment. The silence followed her like a shadow. On her desk, the folder from Calvin's office still sat unopened from the day she'd last reviewed it. It contained every legal document confirming her inheritance. Every note Eleanor had carefully laid out. A map of intention. Emily opened it again and ran her fingers along the embossed letterhead. She thought of the Vermont house. The collection of heirlooms. The library with the window seat Eleanor loved most. She imagined her father sitting at the kitchen table, calculating how quickly it could be sold. She imagined her mother's voice half pleading, half commanding. You're the only one who can help. Don't you want to protect your brother? She closed the folder. Not out of uncertainty, but finality. No. She would not be doing this again. Later that evening, she called Veronica, her best friend and business partner. What are you doing right now? Emily asked. Veronica didn't hesitate. Sipping bad wine and waiting for you to come to your senses. What happened? Emily let out a long breath. They want me to liquidate everything. For Tyler. Veronica didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, you're not going to. Right. No. Emily said. I'm not. Finally. Veronica said. You're done playing lifeboat to people who keep sinking on purpose. Emily laughed, a real one this time. But her laughter turned to a quiet resolve. Because while she had made the decision not to rescue Tyler again, she knew her family wouldn't accept that easily. They'd push harder this time. And she had to be ready. The following Thursday, as Emily stood in line at her usual coffee shop, Veronica's name lit up her phone. Veronica 10:43 a.m. Saw Tyler at the Riverfront Casino last night. VIP section. Black chip table. He didn't see me. Emily stared at the message. Her stomach turned not from surprise, but from the familiarity of it. Of course he was gambling again. Of course he wasn't getting help, as her parents claimed. Of course they were. Once again. spinning lies out of desperation and calling it love. She tapped a quick reply. Emily, 10:45 a.m., thank you. Can you talk tonight? Veronica, 10:46 a.m. Always? Just say when. Emily took her coffee, walked out into the chilly air, and made a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. It was time to speak to Calvin Spencer. Calvin's office was exactly as she remembered it, dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books arranged with obsessive precision, and a grandfather clock that ticked just a little too loud. It was the kind of office that whispered legacy, not change. Calvin, in his early 70s, rose to greet her with the same warmth and caution that had always defined his manner. Emily, I was actually just thinking about you, he said, gesturing to the leather chairs in front of his desk. That's either flattering or deeply ominous, Emily replied. He offered a small smile. You have good instincts. Sit. She did. I've received some concerning inquiries from your father over the past few weeks, he began. Emily raised an eyebrow. About what? About your grandmother's estate. Specifically, account balances, asset holdings, property deeds. He claimed you asked him to review the documents on your behalf. Emily's jaw tightened. I absolutely did not. I assumed as much, Calvin said. He reached into his desk and pulled out a manila folder. So I didn't give him anything. But I want you to see this. Inside were printed email exchanges. One caught her eye immediately, her father asking a junior associate at Calvin's firm for a complete estate breakdown and mentioning expedited access to portfolio summaries. Another showed a forwarded message from her mother, requesting updated valuations for the Vermont property and a breakdown of heirloom insurance values. What are they doing? Emily asked, the chill now creeping through her spine. Calvin hesitated before answering. I believe they're preparing to form a legal structure, a trust. A new one, with themselves as trustees. Emily blinked. A family trust, he nodded. Yes, one that would, in theory, consolidate all of Eleanor's assets, yours now under a single umbrella controlled by your parents. They've been meeting with another attorney. Not someone I know. She felt the breath leave her body. They're trying to legally position themselves to take control of what Eleanor left me, and make it look like a family decision. Precisely, Calvin confirmed. Emily left the office with a pit in her stomach and a folder of printed emails in her bag. As she walked down the steps into the afternoon sun, she could already hear the voice her mother would use. This isn't about control, darling. It's about protecting the family legacy. And her father, with his practiced calm, we're just trying to keep everything aligned. Financially strategic. But she knew what it really was. A quiet coup. They were planning to make theft look like unity. That night, Veronica sat across from her at the kitchen island in Emily's apartment, swirling red wine in a glass. They're forming a trust behind your back, she repeated slowly. Emily nodded. It's more than that. They're laying groundwork for a legal takeover. Once they consolidate the assets, they can liquidate what they want. Pay Tyler's debts. Maybe more. Do they even realize they're gambling with their own daughter's inheritance to save their son's addiction? I don't think they care what it costs as long as it keeps Tyler afloat, Emily said bitterly. Veronica leaned forward. What are you going to do? Emily took a slow breath. Her voice was steady. I'm going to build a wall. They can't get through. The next morning, She called Diana Roberts. Diana was not the kind of lawyer her parents would have hired. Young, sharp, and aggressive in a way that didn't apologize for itself. Emily had met her once at a Women in Finance panel and remembered her saying, "Wealth doesn't need to be loud, but it should always be protected." An hour later, they were sitting in Diana's glass-walled office downtown. "So, let me get this straight," Diana said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "You're the rightful inheritor. The estate is in final probate. And your parents are quietly trying to consolidate your assets under their control." "Correct. And your brother owes more than $250,000 to a mix of casinos, creditors, and possibly loan sharks." Emily nodded. "Okay," Diana said, sitting back. "We're going to build an irrevocable trust. You'll be both grantor and beneficiary. Once those assets are transferred, no one, not your parents, not even a court challenge, can touch them." Emily exhaled slowly. "Can we do it before they act? If we start now?" "Yes. We'll need your full cooperation and speed." "I'll do whatever it takes." Diana gave a curt, approving nod. "Then let's protect what's yours." That night, Emily sat by her window, overlooking the city lights below. She held one of the heirlooms from Eleanor's collection, a delicate pocket watch, engraved with the initials of her great-grandfather. She thought of everything that had passed through generations quietly, purposefully, protected by women who never raised their voices but always raised the standard. And now it was her turn. Not to fight for money, but to fight for meaning. By Monday morning, Emily had signed the final documents. The irrevocable trust now existed. Its structure was ironclad. Emily was both the grantor and sole beneficiary, with Diana as the legal trustee of record. Everything property, investment portfolios, heirlooms would now be managed under the trust, protected from outside interference. It was Eleanor's legacy, rebuilt as a fortress. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of action. First, Emily worked with Calvin to transfer ownership of the Vermont property. They filed the deed under the trust's name, skipping family disclosure entirely. Then came the investment portfolio. Her firm's internal team executed the switch to new accounts that only Diana could access. But the hardest task still lay ahead. Retrieving the physical assets. The jewelry, the documents, the family heirlooms. They were locked in a safety deposit box at Fairview Bank, the same branch her parents had used for 40 years. The manager, Margaret, had attended Emily's high school graduation party. The tellers sent her Christmas cards. And now she had to walk in, take everything, and leave without a whisper reaching her mother. Thursday afternoon. Emily dressed carefully, no bold lipstick, no business heels, nothing that would draw attention. She looked like a woman running errands, not transferring generational wealth. Still, her heart pounded as she stepped through the revolving doors and approached the vault manager. "Miss Bennett," Margaret said warmly. "It's been a while." "Too long," Emily replied, managing a smile. "I assume you're here for the family box." "Yes. I'll need to remove some items." Margaret led her into the small, private viewing room where the steel drawers lined the walls like quiet sentinels. The one she needed sat second from the bottom, inside Eleanor's world, carefully arranged. Emily's breath caught as she lifted the lid from a blue velvet pouch. The emerald necklace. Delicate, elegant, She remembered Eleanor fastening it around her neck on graduation day. "This will be yours someday," her grandmother had whispered. "And not just because it's beautiful. Because you'll understand what it cost me to keep it." Underneath was a worn recipe book, bound in linen. Eleanor's handwriting filled every margin. Lemon scones, blackberry preserves, stew with thyme and clove. Small notes in cursive reminded Emily not to overmix the dough, or to use fresh lavender. Never dread. There was a black and white photo tucked inside Eleanor as a girl, barefoot in the Vermont orchard, holding a pie dish in one hand and a book in the other. Emily smiled through sudden tears. She hadn't realized how much she missed her until that moment. In the far corner of the box was a sealed envelope. Faded blue ink. Her name Emily. Hands trembling. She opened it. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then everything has gone as I hoped. I couldn't protect you from every storm, but I could leave you the shelter I built. This house. This history, it's yours because you carry more than blood. You carry responsibility. And grace. And strength. There may come a time when the people closest to you ask you to sacrifice what's right, just to keep the peace. I hope, when that day comes, you will choose the harder path. The one that preserves integrity, not illusion. Do not confuse love with surrender. Do not confuse silence with wisdom. You have the strength to say no. Use it. All my love." Grandma Eleanor Emily pressed the letter to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt steady. Back in the vault room, she packed the necklace, recipe book, photos, and other heirlooms into a secure case. She signed the release forms, thanked Margaret, and walked out of the bank into the fading light of afternoon. She'd done it. The last piece was in place. That night, she and Diana reviewed every asset one final time. The Vermont deed filed, the accounts locked under the trust, the jewelry and heirlooms in Emily's possession and covered by a new insurance policy tied to the trust. You've just created a barrier no one in your family can legally cross, Diana said, signing off on the final affidavit. They'll try, Emily replied. Yes, Diana said calmly, but now they'll fail. As Emily drove home, she replayed her parents' voices in her mind. You'll come around. You always do. We just need access. Temporarily. Think of the family. They didn't see what she was building. Not a wall, but a boundary. And for the first time, she felt the difference. She wasn't cutting them out. She was cutting out the pattern. Saturday's family meeting was set for 3 p.m. Emily had already chosen her seat. She would arrive early, calm, composed, with the documentation folder resting on her lap. And when they asked because they would, she'd be ready. She wasn't the same daughter who showed up to fix everything. This time, she was showing up to say no. And mean it. At 2:58 p.m. Emily pulled into the circular driveway of the house she'd grown up in. It looked the same. The white shutters. The manicured hedges. The maple tree in the front yard that Tyler once tried to set on fire with fireworks when he was 13. Back then, their father had scolded him gently. When Emily broke a teacup the next week, he refused to speak to her for a day. Funny how the house still looked like safety from the outside. She gripped the steering wheel, trying to still the tremble in her hands. You're not here to fix anything. You're here to protect everything. She walked up the front steps slowly, the folder of documents tucked under her arm, her heels clicking against the stone like a metronome counting down to war. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. Powder blue cardigan, pearl earrings. That same honeyed voice she used when pretending everything was under control. Emily. Finally. Everyone's waiting. Inside. The living room looked staged. Her father in his leather armchair. Tyler slouched on the couch, eyes dark and restless. A folder sat neatly on the coffee table, along with a fountain pen placed just so. Drink, her father asked, gesturing to the sideboard. Water's fine, she replied. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. After a few minutes of forced pleasantries, her father cleared his throat. Emily, we've asked you here today to discuss an important family matter. He began. Emily said nothing, just nodded. You know, we've always believed in unity, especially during difficult times. He continued. Tyler's had a setback. Her mother interjected. And we want to address it together. As a family. Emily's eyes drifted to Tyler. He didn't look at her. What kind of setback? She asked. Her father sighed. Some debts. Not insurmountable. But sensitive. Her mother leaned in. Lowering her voice like this was a confession. Casino markers. Some private loans. A bit of an IRS issue. How much? Emily asked flatly. Her father hesitated. $327,000. Her mother answered. Plus some back taxes. And a small loan from Uncle Frank. Over $400. Ling. And they still called it a setback. That's why we've taken the initiative. Her father said, sliding the folder toward her. We're forming a family trust. One that consolidates the estate assets, your grandmother's house, the portfolio, the jewelry under a single structure, with you as the primary beneficiary. Her mother added quickly. But we'll serve as trustees. It's just a formality. Really? It's what Eleanor would have wanted. Her father insisted. Emily reached into her bag, pulled out her own folder, and placed it quietly on top of theirs. No, she said. A silence fell over the room. Thick as wool. No, her mother echoed. Blinking. No. Emily repeated, her voice steady. You're not forming a trust. You're not liquidating assets. You're not selling the Vermont house or the heirlooms. Her father's face darkened. And how exactly do you plan to stop us? I already have, Emily said. As of this week, all of Eleanor's assets have been transferred into an irrevocable trust. I am the sole beneficiary. Everything house, accounts, heirlooms is legally protected. Her mother paled. Her father stood up, his voice rising. That's not possible. The estate is still final probate cleared last week. Emily interrupted. I expedited the process with Calvin. Diana Roberts helped me complete the trust formation. It's done. Tyler stood now, too. His face flushed. You, selfish, teach. He snapped. You'd let me get hurt over a piece of property. Emily stayed seated. I'm protecting more than property. I'm protecting what Grandma actually wanted. And you're not entitled to destroy that just because you can't control yourself. Tyler took a step forward, trembling. You always thought you were better than me. Since we were kids. The perfect daughter. The favorite after she died. I never needed to be the favorite, she said quietly. I just wanted to be respected. For once. Her father's voice turned cold and legal. We'll challenge this. In court. Go ahead. Emily replied. The trust is airtight. Diana made sure of it. You'll lose. And you'll waste whatever money you have left trying. Her mother's voice cracked. You would really let your brother be hurt physically just to make a point. Emily's voice finally wavered. I'm not making a point. I'm breaking a pattern. Her mother rushed forward. Tears glistening. We're not the enemy. Emily. But Emily stepped back. No. But you've been acting like one. The room fell into silence. No yelling. Just a vacuum where the old dynamics used to live. Her father sat down slowly. Tyler dropped back onto the couch, cursing under his breath. You'll regret this, he muttered. But Emily no longer feared his disapproval, or her parents' disappointment. They had raised her to be responsible, and now they hated her for finally taking responsibility. She turned toward the door, her folder still in hand. As she reached it, her father called after her. This isn't over. Emily turned back, one hand on the doorknob. No, she said. It's just beginning. She stepped out into the fading light. Her breath hitched. Her vision blurred. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking. Not because she doubted herself, but because, for the first time in her life, she hadn't given in. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, forehead pressed to the steering wheel. Then, slowly, she exhaled and drove away. Emily hadn't even taken off her coat when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Local, but not saved. She stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over decline, but then something inside her, a tug of instinct, urged her to answer. Hello. A pause. Then a voice, rough with age but surprisingly gentle. Emily. It's Thomas Brooks. I'm your father's brother. She stood frozen in her kitchen, one hand still on the coffee maker. Uncle Thomas, she said, startled. I haven't seen you since your grandfather's funeral. I know. I wasn't sure you'd take my call. But Calvin Spencer gave me your number. He thought you might need to know the rest. Emily sank slowly into a chair. The rest of what? They met the next morning at a quiet cafe tucked between two bookstores in Lakeview. Thomas was already at the corner table when she arrived, nursing a black coffee. He stood to greet her, taller than she remembered, with kind eyes and a slight stoop in his shoulders. You look like Eleanor, he said. Emily smiled softly. I hear that a lot lately. They sat. He didn't waste time. I assume last night didn't go well. That would be an understatement, Emily said, resting her hands on the warm mug. They tried to guilt me, then threatened legal action. Tyler yelled. My mother cried. My father calculated. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. They've always leaned on performance when they lose control. Emily looked up. You sound like you've seen this before. I lived it, he said. Thomas explained that he had once been close with his brother partners in their father's firm. Best men at each other's weddings. But things had soured years ago. It started when Richard began taking financial risks. He said, Big ones. Real estate ventures. High-yield portfolios. Most of it fueled by pride. And when it went wrong, Emily asked. They blamed everyone but themselves. Including me. Thomas had raised concerns about mismanaged funds, questionable loans, and irregularities in the firm's books. Rather than face the truth, Richard had cut him off both from the firm and the family. He told people I stole from the company. Thomas added, voice steady but still pained. It wasn't true. But it worked. Emily sat back, stunned. Then came the bigger revelation. They're broke. Emily. Thomas said. Have been for years. She blinked. What? They mortgaged the house twice. Liquidated retirement accounts. Your father's practice hasn't turned a profit in almost a decade. Your mother's been maxing out credit cards to maintain appearances. Emily stared at him. Processing. They were waiting. He continued. For Eleanor's estate to fix everything. Not just Tyler. Everything. Her breath caught. All this time. I thought they were trying to save Tyler. They were trying to save themselves. Thomas said gently. Tyler just gave them the excuse. It made a cruel kind of sense. The pressure. The desperation. The insistence that Emily contribute to the family. The narrative of unity. Of shared burdens. When in fact, the burden had already been placed squarely on her shoulders. They hadn't just expected her to help. They'd been planning for her to take care of them. I don't think your parents are evil, Thomas said carefully. But they're afraid. And entitled. A dangereuse combination. Emily looked down at her hands. They never asked me. Just assumed. He nodded. Because you always said yes. You were the reliable one. The strong one. They mistook your boundaries for resources. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily whispered. Do you think I did the right thing? Thomas didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low but firm. I think you did the necessary thing. And that's harder. He leaned in. Emily. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones most likely to use our love against us. Not because they're monsters, but because they don't know any other way to survive. She swallowed the lump in her throat. That's what Eleanor feared. She said quietly. That they'd destroy everything just to stay afloat. Thomas placed a small folder on the table. Eleanor asked me to keep an eye on things if anything happened to her. I've been watching from a distance. These are bank statements. Property records. Debts? I thought you should see them for yourself. Emily opened the folder and scanned the pages. It was worse than she imagined. Interest-only mortgages. Credit lines nearly tapped. Medical bills. IRS lien. The facade had been pristine. The foundation was crumbling. You're the first in our family to break the cycle, Thomas said. To say I love you. But I won't drown for you. A tear slid down Emily's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. When they parted, he hugged her a gentle, steadying embrace that reminded her of the way Eleanor used to hold her when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. You're not alone. Quito, he said before she left. Not anymore. That night, Emily sat on her porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and the documents spread before her. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying scents of wood smoke and fallen leaves. For the first time, she saw the truth not as betrayal but as clarity. Her parents hadn't set out to hurt her, but they had been willing to sacrifice her. And that she finally understood, was a line she could never let anyone cross again. The second family meeting took place at Emily's condo. Not the childhood home. That, in itself, sent a message. This time, she controlled the setting, the agenda, the tone. She made coffee herself and laid out snacks on a tray, not as a host trying to please, but as a woman making her own space for truth. At 2:15, her parents arrived. Emily's mother clutched her handbag like a lifeline. Her father's mouth was tight, jaw clenched. They looked older than they had the week before. At 2:25, Tyler shuffled in, wearing wrinkled jeans and a hoodie that hung off his thinner frame. His eyes were bloodshot but clearer than she'd seen in years. He didn't meet her gaze. She didn't force it. At 2:30 sharp, Emily began. "There's no negotiation today," she said, setting her folder down. "I'm not here to discuss access to Grandma's assets. That's not happening. The trust is sealed, irrevocable, protected. This conversation is about something else." Her parents shifted in their seats. Her father opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. "No interruptions. You had your meeting. This one is mine." She looked at each of them, "Whether you accept it or not, I still care about this family. And I'm willing to help, but on my terms. Take them or leave them." She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to read. Plan for recovery, 3 conditions. Tuller enters inpatient rehab. Immediately. A real program. 90 days. Minimum. She said. "I've researched a facility outside Madison. It's discreet, professional, and reputable. I'll pay for it," she added. "But from my own savings, not the trust. And only if Tyler commits, signs a contract, and gives full access to treatment updates." Tyler stared at the floor. "Will there be a drug test?" he muttered. Emily didn't flinch. "Yes. Weekly. And a counselor check-in." "I'm not a child," he snapped. "No," she said evenly. "You're a man who borrowed hundreds of thousands from criminals and nearly dragged us all down with you. The time for soft words is over." Our mom and dad sell the house and downsize. "You've been living on borrowed time," Emily continued, turning toward her parents. "Multiple mortgages. Credit cards. No retirement cushion." Her mother's cheeks flushed. "We've managed." "No," Emily interrupted. "You've performed. There's a difference." She softened, but only slightly. "I'll help you find a financial advisor. I'll contribute some support to stabilize things, but only if you start being honest. Sell the house. Cut expenses. No more denial." Her father looked like he'd swallowed glass. "We built that home. And it's burying you," she said. "Pride doesn't pay the mortgage." Sen. "No money goes to illegal debts. None. I'll help negotiate payment plans with legitimate creditors, banks, IRS, even credit cards. But not a single dollar goes to loan sharks or underground lenders." "But Emily," her mother whispered. "These people could hurt him." Emily didn't blink. "Then we involve the police. Or a lawyer. But we don't hand over family history to people who threaten us. That ends here." She leaned forward. "This is the line. I will throw you a rope, but I will not jump into the ocean because you refuse to swim." Silence filled the room. Then, to her surprise, Tyler spoke first. "I'll go," he said. Voice quiet. "I'm scared out of my mind. But, yeah, I'll try." Emily nodded, but didn't smile. "This is your last try. There's no one more chance after this." "I know," he said. And, for once, he meant it. Her mother wept softly. Not manipulative. Just tired. "We didn't mean to put this all on you." Emily's voice stayed calm. "But you did. You just didn't want to admit it." Her father exhaled. "What happens if we say no? Then you figure it out on your own." She replied. "I won't block you. But I won't rescue you either. No more martyrdom. Not for me. Not for Grandma's legacy." After an hour of tense logistics contacts, dates, signatures, they all stood to leave. "Tula Lingel. I know I don't deserve your help." "This isn't about deserving," Emily said. "It's about breaking the cycle." "Will you visit?" he asked. "After the first 30 days. If you're still there." He nodded. Eyes wet. When the door finally closed, Emily let out a long breath. Her hands weren't shaking this time. She wasn't numb, or angry, or triumphant. She was clear. She had done something new. Something bold. Something Eleanor would have been proud of. She hadn't shut the door on her family. She had just built a lock and handed them the key with terms. 6 months later, the house on Maple Hill stood proud beneath a canopy of blazing red and gold. Emily had never seen Vermont look quite like this, like the land itself was exhaling after a long, silent prayer. Wind swept leaves across the wraparound porch, and every window glowed with the amber light of late afternoon. She was finally home. Not just living here, but rooted. Present. Unburdened. Inside. The floors had been refinished. The hearth rebuilt. The garden revived. Everything preserved in the spirit of Eleanor's quiet strength. Emily had kept her promise to protect the house. The heirlooms. The soul of what her grandmother left behind. But the real work had been inside her. No longer the daughter who carried guilt like armor. No longer the sister who fixed everything without complaint. Now, she was just herself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Tyler had surprised her. 3 months in inpatient rehab. Then sober living. Then a job simple, humble, real. He worked at a local garden center now. Coming home every evening with dirt on his hands and peace in his voice. He had stopped making promises. Stopped giving speeches. Instead, he showed up. On weekends, he helped prune the orchard behind the house. He'd repaired one of the old stone walls himself. Brick by brick. They didn't talk about the past much. And maybe that was for the best. But every time Emily saw him quietly watering the trees Eleanor had planted 40 years ago, she knew something had shifted. Something had held. Her parents had moved to a small condo outside of Boston. No more bridge club. No more extravagant dinners. They'd sold the house, consolidated debt, and started attending financial counseling through a nonprofit. It wasn't perfect. They still complained. Still danced around apologies. But they no longer asked Emily for money. And that was enough. Her mother now called once a week just to check in. Her father sent articles about trust law. As if trying to catch up. There were still sharp edges between them. but no more invisible knives. One crisp Sunday morning. As frost edged, the grass and chimney smoke curled into a bright blue sky. Emily found herself in Eleanor's old study. She was reorganizing the bookshelves when she noticed a warped floorboard beneath the desk. She pried it up gently. Beneath it, tucked in a small tin box, was a folded piece of stationery. Her breath caught. It was Eleanor's handwriting. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means you've chosen the house. That you've chosen yourself. This home has seen 4 generations of our family. Joy, grief, betrayal, love. And now you're perhaps the first to truly understand what legacy means. People will tell you that setting boundaries is selfish, that saying no is unkind. But the truth is limits are love. 2. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer the people we care about is the space to face their own consequences. You've always had strength, Emily, but now you have clarity, and that will carry you farther than anything I could leave you in my will. Don't let the world or your past shrink your spirit. The house is yours. But more than that, the freedom is. All my love. Grandma Eleanor. Emily sank into the old leather reading chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears came. Not from pain, but from recognition. Eleanor had known it all. The pressure, the guilt, the expectation. She had seen it unraveling even before Emily did. And she had left her something better than silver and stocks. She had left her permission to stop carrying everyone else, to stop setting herself on fire to keep others warm. Later that night, Emily lit a fire in the hearth and made tea in Eleanor's blue porcelain pot. Veronica called to check in. Nathan texted from Seattle thinking of you. Fall in Vermont must be magic. And it was. It truly was. Before bed, Emily stepped outside. Tyler had just finished trimming the last of the hedges. He gave her a small wave and a quiet night. She smiled back. Then she turned to the stars above the orchard and whispered softly, thank you. For the strength. For the boundaries. For the house that healed her. The table was set for 7. Not a grand banquet, just a long oak table warmed by candlelight. Mismatched silverware. And Eleanor's favorite porcelain plates. Outside the windows, dusk fell quietly over the Vermont hills. The last golden leaves swirling across the yard. Emily stood at the stove, stirring a pot of rosemary stew. The smell of garlic and thyme curling around her like a memory. This was the first family dinner since everything fell apart. And somehow, it was also the first real one. They arrived in pairs. Cautious but willing. Veronica came first, bearing wine and the same dry humor that had gotten Emily through every storm. Then Uncle Thomas, who brought a fresh-baked apple pie and a quiet kind of steadiness she'd grown to trust. Her parents followed Emily's mother gripping a bouquet of sunflowers. Her father carrying a bottle of sparkling cider. No demands. No lectures. Just offerings. Tyler came last. He brought nothing but himself. But that was enough. They sat. A little stiff. A little unsure. Veronica cracked a joke about the candles being too romantic. Uncle Thomas complimented the woodwork. Emily's mother offered to help with the salad. Her father didn't touch his phone once. And Tyler, he looked people in the eye. That was new. When the food was served, Emily raised her glass. Thank you all for coming, she said. her voice steady. I know this isn't the kind of family dinner we used to have. And maybe that's a good thing. There were polite chuckles. Nods. She continued. I spent a long time believing I had to earn my place at this table. By being useful, quiet, responsible. She glanced at Tyler, who met her gaze and gave the faintest nod. But that's not what family should be. And it's not what Grandma Eleanor believed either. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded letter, the one she'd found beneath the floorboard just weeks before. She didn't read it aloud. She didn't have to. Instead, she said, what she left me wasn't just property. Or assets. She left me something better. The room quieted. She left me the courage to believe I was worth protecting even if no one else did. Veronica's eyes glistened. Her mother looked down at her lap. Tyler exhaled a breath he'd been holding. Emily smiled. Gently. That's the legacy I want to live. And maybe share. The evening unfolded not perfectly. But honestly, there were awkward pauses. Yes. But also laughter real and unforced. Tyler told a story about mistaking fertilizer for flour. Uncle Thomas recounted a fishing trip with Eleanor that ended in a thunderstorm and an emergency blanket made of grocery bags. Veronica toasted to finally using emotional boundaries as centerpieces. And when the last plate was cleared and the candles burned low, Emily walked into the study and returned with a photo. Eleanor. Young and defiant. Smiling with dirt on her hands and the Vermont house behind her. She built this, Emily said. And now we get to decide what we build next. That night, after everyone had gone and the house had gone still, Emily stood alone at the porch. A soft breeze danced through the apple trees. She looked up at the stars and whispered, I kept my promise. And somehow, she felt the warmth of an answer. Final words. To the reader, I didn't just inherit property. I inherited courage. And wisdom. And the belief that I am worthy of protection even when the people I love forget to protect me. If you're reading this and wondering whether it's okay to say no, whether it's okay to stop fixing everything for everyone else, let me be the one to tell you. Yes. Yes. It is. You are allowed to keep what was meant for you. You are allowed to stand your ground. Because sometimes, the most powerful legacy is learning to love yourself without conditions.